thank you everyone for coming and the prior panel. I learned so much. I'm sure we all did, and looking forward to asking more questions to you guys at the end. So many questions. I'm Sanju Munatra. I'm a cardiologist at Leahy Hospital and Medical Center in Burlington. Also have a pleasure and honor of serving as a medical director of sustainability at Leahy under Beth Israel Leahy Health Umbrella, with every leading the program for the system, and also as a president of Sustain Health Solution, which is a non-profit organization focused on bringing sustainability to healthcare organizations and care delivery, kind of shifting the mindset of how we see the data, how we deliver the care, and how we still can be sustainable while providing excellent care. We work with healthcare organizations throughout and provide them the insights, the data, so that they can measure, understand, and hopefully reduce their environmental footprint. But I think it's important to break our silos, and that's why I'm so excited about this panel today. We need to work across our roles, disciplines, and industry, and the program today is a testament that if you bring people together, we can bring these silos and work together. As someone had brought it up previously, we have a large mission and in healthcare in general, but we have been hiding behind that mission for a long time, to the degree that if put together as a sector, the entire sector as a country, we would be the 5th largest country on this planet, only after US, China, Russia, India, in sense of greenhouse gas emission. But plastic is not even accounted for fully in this calculation. We use more virgin single-use plastic items than probably most other industries, and that's troublesome. Not just from sustainability standpoint, but our health standpoint as well, because at the end of the day, this plastic is not leaving us for 400 plus years, as we all know. And we are seeing already the impact of microplastic into trickling into our bodies, right? We all have seen these news articles time and again. Spoonful of microplastic probably sitting in all our brains. Can we recycle our way out of it? I'm not sure. I was very excited to hear all the possible opportunities there, but I think we have to reimagine how we deliver the care. So, but without further ado, I would love to request the panelists today to introduce themselves, a little bit about where they're coming from and why they are doing what they're doing. And by the way, I'll say that that I'm not doing this just because I'm a cardiologist and see this microplastic impact on heart and brains, but also I'm a father of an 8-year-old daughter, and I want to leave something habitable behind, and I'm sure we all have our reasons. So we'd love to hear from you, Avery.
Good morning. Hi everyone, I'm Avery Clardy. I'm the Climate Sustainability Director at Beth Israel Medical Center. Work very closely with Saraju at LHMC. We are 2 of the largest medical centers in the Beth Israel Health System, and really are helping to drive and operationalize sustainability across our system. So in my purview for sustainability, everything associated with the environmental impact of healthcare falls underneath what I'm working on. But for this conversation, really when we talk about circularity, when we talk about how do we think about capturing some of these plastic materials, or ultimately reducing the plastic materials that are flowing through our facilities, this all rolls up into our zero waste by 2030 goals, as well as working very closely with our supply chain on overall reducing our greenhouse gas emissions associated with our procurement processes, which is obviously a challenging thing to do. And I would love to challenge healthcare and to really not continue to say, oh, well, you're exempt from this in the future. That we can do better. There's a lot of opportunities in which hospitals can think differently. And that's part of my role, is bringing in all of the core operational specialists, all of the clinicians, all of our researchers to figure out where's the opportunity, how do we reduce our environmental impact and move from here. Because ultimately, we're here to serve patients in our communities within our 4 walls, But we all know now we're impacting our communities and those we're trying to help outside of our four walls with our massive 24/7 operations. So how can we do better? Beyond my role at Beth Israel, I love that the Healthcare Plastics Recycling Council came up. I'm also the chair for the Healthcare Facilities Advisory Board for HPRC, so happy to talk a little bit more about that work and how we're really looking at how do you bring together all the manufacturers, all the plastics manufacturers of healthcare products, and how do you set up programs at a hospital, and also how do you partner downstream with the recyclers and really start to build that circular program. And beyond that, I'm also the senior advisor for Christine Health Solutions, so happy to talk a little bit more about that as well. Thank you.
Anything on? How about that? There we go. So I'm Noah Piles. I'm the COO of Polycarbonate, one of the founders of the company. And one thing I'm noticing is that a lot of us have the same origin story here, where we're either on paths to be scientists or be physicians. We get distracted. We consider the impact that we're making. I honestly have a similar story to Gretchen, to Sarju as well, where I was in medical school at the University of Pittsburgh. I thought I was going to be a plastic surgeon, doing burn reconstruction, and I found myself obsessed with single-use plastics. I couldn't stop thinking about it. I was working in a laboratory. I would mess up an experiment, and I'd have to dispose of like 7 pounds of tissue culture plates, and it just didn't sit right with me. And then I looked at where that stuff goes, how it's processed, the communities that it's ultimately buried around in terms of landfills. And it just dawned on me that there just has to be a better way for us to produce innovative output without costing the environment so much. And so I ended up founding Polycarbonate in 2020 with my then roommate, James O'Brien. And he and I basically decided we were going to swing for the fences. We were going to find what is the most sustainable thing we can do with plastics coming from this sector. And so we started with, it has to be circularized. We have to bring it back to the scientists in the laboratory to close the loop, but most importantly, maximize recapture rates and use cycles of this material so that we minimize the amount of virgin material coming into the industry every single year. And that's what we started out trying to do in 2020, and it's now 5 years later. We've scaled our operation nationally, servicing customers in Canada, and soon to be servicing customers in the UK and the European Union. So it's been a journey, but I am inspired every time I come to these events by folks that have been on a career trajectory and let themselves be distracted by something they care about. It never resonates with me, so.
So you did become plastic surgeon though.
What's that?
You did become plastic surgeon, a different kind.
That's exactly right.
That's a good one. So my name is Natai Maman. I'm founder and CEO of RT MicroDX. And we are on path to developing a single-use, fully disposable molecular test for at-home testing with the intent of addressing the problem of testing and diagnosis access. And how we are addressing this sustainability issue is the fact that in our solution requires plastic and also requires heating. And a lot of the solutions out there have needed to use AA batteries or lithium batteries or just really large devices that are then disposed of and not at all sustainable. So we're addressing that by looking at different ways to heat the molecular process in a sustainable way. We're right now partnering with a paper battery laminate, which essentially heats up upon hydration and then dries down to paper that completely just biodegrades. And then looking at different ways to have our solution in a better sustainable plastic. So we're really looking at making our solution not just affordable and accessible, but also as sustainable as possible, given all of the processes that we have to create within our solution.
Morning, everyone. My name is CL Tan. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Fax Technologies. We are a sterilization company, and what that means is we enable sterilization without machines. Ultimately, for our customers in medical device, pharma, life sciences, this means that they can terminally sterilize, right, in the context of life cycle analysis, before the device ever gets to the hospital. And newly, our customers are also looking at how do you cost effectively re-sterilize, either for reprocessing the instrument with a smaller footprint, or we're looking at how do you reclaim something or ship something back to the original manufacturer and reduce the burden of and price of shipping, because it's no longer pathogenic, now it's just regular waste. We serve customers in 3 continents, North America, Europe, and Asia as well, so lots of different regulations to jump through, different motivations certainly, but generally our customers think of us as a operational efficiency, supply chain efficiency company first, with the added benefit of reducing their carbon footprint second.
Thank you so much. So much to learn and very excited. Now starting with you, there's a running joke in medicine about almost every single subspecialties, but particularly for plastic surgeons. They say, if I bring my plastic, does the cost of the surgery goes down, of the plastic surgery, right? And so on that note, how do we reimagine, and I know we have had this conversation in the background in some degree, how do we reimagine where the cost of doing the right thing is somehow not a different line item, but not too much. So any thoughts on that? Like, what can we do as a society, as a medical field?
I love this question because it goes to both the carrot and stick model that we've been talking about in the previous panel. So I was operating out in California a year ago now, and I was watching waste energy plants get shut down because the state is making it more and more difficult to burn trash fundamentally. And so that meant that the cost of recycling with polycarbonate was all of a sudden more cost competitive, or at least cheaper, than a lot of instances where people were using waste energy. And so there's the stick model. That's how you're driving the cost effectiveness of doing the right thing. The other way to do it is to put a premium on the resource. I talk about this all the time. We're like, plastic, let's start somewhere else. We have enormous success in our circular economy with metals, with steel, with copper, and we're growing an entire multi-billion-dollar industry to recycle lithium. That is scarce. We target it because it's scarce, but iron isn't scarce. Why do we recycle 95% of steel in this country? It's because we've created a demand for the material that works for both the consumer and the manufacturer. So that's a roundabout way of saying that if we can, as consumers, prioritize sustainability, the value goes up. To the manufacturers, they then have an imperative to provide it to you, the consumer, who is prioritizing it as a differentiator for the product in the market. Fundamentally, these plastics in these products constitute less than 10% of the cost of the total product. They are not the driving factor of why those are expensive. It has more to do with tooling and logistics. The plastics are a minor cost. If it costs 20% more to use more sustainable material that's provably more sustainable, it's not going to show up as a 50% increase in the cost of these products in the laboratory. So it's kind of there's 2 sides to this issue. We are quickly legislating our way towards sustainability being more cost effective, but most importantly, because of all the people in this room, because all the people that left their careers to ultimately pursue this issue, we are seeing a greater and greater amount of demand in this space that is ultimately making it more and more cost effective to deliver for those consumers.
Thank you. CLTN, coming to you. We know there is a huge issue with sterilization, right? And in the medical field, particularly as we have to sterilize and re-sterilize our, operating instruments, and that is seen as one of the potential solution for not having so much single-use plastic. But at the same time, that process is highly, energy-consuming. Also, many chemicals we use, like ethylene dioxide and whatnot, right? They are carcinogen, and there are warnings all around. If you ever walk into the sterilization unit, there are 20 warning signs, right? That you need to be careful. This can cause cancer, infertility, and that's for people working there. But what about when we somehow dispose those things? It affects the biodiversity downstream, which we do know has a larger impact than simply greenhouse gas calculation. So how does your solution fit into this problem of sterilization, which we think is a part of the solution, but still has its own problems.
Yeah, when we think about sterilization after use in a healthcare setting, right, it's kind of a three-pronged problem, right? There's the sustainability and safety element, right? There's the patient safety element, and then there is the ROI element, right? And all three have to work together to move us forward in any direction. And so you take the example of endoscopes, right? We know high source of hospital-acquired infections, it's dirty, some hospitals will outsource that to a third party. Who holds a liability for infection? You just want to use the first, you want to have the first appointment of the day, right? Based off of what we know. Who carries the liability? Is it the sterilizer? Well, you have to clean it well before it gets sterile. There is literally matter that you don't want to share with others in these endoscopes before they're cleaned. Right, so you see from a regulatory perspective, there's pressure from FDA, for example, to say, okay, currently these are just decontaminated, right, log 4. So we want to get it to a log 6 sterilization, which is out of a population of 1 million microbes, only one survives, up to one survives after sterilization. Well, what the big endoscope companies are finding is, hey, if we do that, we are dropping the number of uses from the hundreds to about 50 with the existing technology. So now you're asking us to say, well, if we comply, are we going to go back to our healthcare customers and say, hey, sorry, we're complying, but you have to order more of these? You have an ecosystem of companies purchasing, starting to get after the single-use endoscope market to say, well, we're going to solve your liability from a healthcare infection perspective. And so really it's a matter of who's going to pay more, honestly, right? And we believe that the systems now exist because there's not a big enough stick, right? The carrot's great, but do you really want to be the person who made that decision and then someone gets an infection, right? But it's not all bad, because we know that what we've seen is the big enough stick will create change. So for example, to your point of ethylene oxide, colorless, odorless gas, widely used in about the 80s, 90s for sterilization, widely used in the medical device industry currently to sterilize, prior to it being shipped to the medical facility. That is currently under attack because it's been linked to cancer in about 100 communities across our country. Right, so you talk about responsibility and sustainability, how sustainable is that? And it would make your eyes water to think about, you got raw materials coming from California to a manufacturing plant for medical devices in Massachusetts. They send that to South Carolina to sterilize, send it back to Massachusetts, quarantine, then to their distribution center, then across the country. Right? So our customers are looking to cut out that step, not because it's more sustainable, because it's not an insignificant cost to revalidate through FDA. But they're doing it because the litigators, not as American as apple pie, are going after all these plants, right? And because of all those issues in the 80s, they took them out of the facilities, right? Out of the healthcare facilities for the most part, but they're still in our communities. And so where we see a large enough stick, that is where we see the move. I think in the healthcare facility standpoint, sterile processing is a cost center from what we understand, right? So ultimately it comes down to the hospital. What is the amount they're looking to invest? For what ROI?
Yeah, I think like any other industry, we have got really good at exporting our problems to somewhere else, right? If not in the hospital, in the community, to different countries, different people, just so that we can keep doing our work, right? Because we can't really think about all these things all day. And there's a real problem there. But at the same time, we still are the consumer of, all those hazardous chemicals in indirect ways. Coming to antimicrobials, how do you see, you very eloquently described your processes, which, makes this diagnostics very sustainable, but how do you see the role of diagnostics itself more upstream in diagnosing things a little bit earlier, molecular diagnosis pathways where we diagnose things earlier and kind of save downstream healthcare utilization. Any thoughts on that?
I'm not understanding your question.
Sorry. If we diagnose things a little earlier by using this kind of molecular diagnostic, do you think we can save some of the downstream healthcare utilization, which leads to all sorts of problems, right? More testing, more sterilization procedures, etc.
So this is what we see, and I'm a victim of it. We all are. If anybody is sick and you feel like you and your kids are sick, what's your only option? Well, your only option is to go to physician's office, and then the physician will use all this equipment to test you on all those things that may or may not be necessary, and then at that point, they'll either treat you or not treat you. You don't know what you have, then you go further. So an example of mine just last week, or 2 weeks ago, I was terribly sick. I didn't know what I had. So I go to urgent care. My doctor won't see me. So I go to urgent care, very expensive to go to urgent care. Spent a couple hours there. They tested me on a whole bunch of different things. Got an x-ray. I don't know, everything that was wasted at that point. Then didn't get any better. Went back to urgent care, sent me to the ER, so to hold in the ER. Then that didn't work. They found nothing there. So then, a week later, I'm back at finally my doctor wants to see me, tests me for all these things. Well, lo and behold, I just got better. But the point is, think about, that whole process. It took over 2.5 weeks for doctors couldn't figure out what I had, tried everything in the kitchen sink. And the truth is, it could have been easier for me to be able to just test at home affordably. I mean, I've spent, just letting you know, I probably spent over $2,500 in doctor's visit in those 3 or 4 visits. So in terms of cost, time, and waste, that was, there's nothing to say, right? It was just a completely wasteful experience for me. And so I do believe that, testing early, but having tests that are affordable and that are accessible are really key to avoiding any of those costs and any of that waste. But let's be honest, and I want to say that, is when you're sick and you go pick up a test, any consumer, they don't really care if there's a battery in there. They don't. They just want to know. And it's cheaper to go to the doctor. They don't really care if the plastic is sustainable in any way. They don't care. The consumers don't care. They just want to know that they can figure out what they have or not have so that they can take the next step, right? That is the truth. But it's our job to make sure that when we develop these solutions, we develop them in a way that the planet will thank us for it. And so, but it can't be more expensive either. Like, I can't turn this little device, right, because this is what I'm offering here, I can't turn this little device, and right now my cost of this device is, under $5, so that I can, so that consumers can buy it at $25. I can't make this device $40 because the sustainable products are more expensive. We cannot do that. Everything has to come together. Like you explained, the ROI and the need, they all have to come together in a really perfect place. You have to find that sweet spot. And so, we believe that there's a problem of access. We believe that consumers, that the healthcare system is really not keeping up with the needs of the consumers. There's not enough doctors, right? Doctors can't see you. I have a doctor, she can't see me. It took me 3 weeks to see her. Cost me thousands of dollars and time. And so we believe that, testing early means you eliminate all that. But the consumers will not pay for something because it's sustainable. They won't pay for, they won't pay more for it. So yes, I do believe that testing early is essential in the downstream experience for the patient and the downstream waste or waste, in the healthcare system. But we also have to be very cognizant of the fact that in creating the solutions, we have to create them in a way that the consumers will buy them. And cost is a huge factor. So what we're developing is a solution that is, affordable, but also sustainable, so that it kind of like gets that sweet spot.
I think that's a great point, and those doctors tell me all about it, But to your point, the accessibility in healthcare is a primary issue, not just here in, we are very privileged and lucky to be in Boston, but all over the world, and there are different challenges in healthcare. But certainly our practices in North America, particularly in the United States, are very wasteful, and some of it is driven by the way we are trained, the way we are afraid for various things, right? And it's more of a cultural issue. It's more of a mindset issue as well. But I think now let me come to Avery to take her perspective. How do we think as a consumer of many of the solutions you guys all provide as a hospital? You do not have a direct relationship with consumer in a way in healthcare, right? So we are the mediator to a large degree, and that's changing for good. It should. But at least currently for large-scale solutions, we are the mediator, we are the consumer, and that's also in a way part of the problem, because our consumer, when they have a heart attack, they can't choose to go to a hospital which is more sustainable, right? They are gonna go to where the hospital takes them in a shortest amount of time and can provide the best care, right? So it's unlike Louis Vuitton bag, where you can choose that I want to buy this is more sustainable product versus the next thing on the aisle because it's the right thing to do. Here there is no choice. So choice is filtered through us here. So how do you think about this thing? Please walk us through and all the points, not just sustainability, but we both have to answer to our bosses, right? When we have even slightest line item and cost us, because healthcare runs on a very thin margin. I'm not at liberty to say all the numbers, but less than 2%. Let's put it that way. On a good year, which we haven't had in a long time. So how do we think about this?
Yeah, first and foremost, I want to echo, so the consumer won't pay more, and neither will a hospital. And so really, when thinking about sustainability solutions, we need to find a way for it to be affordable. And for it also, depending on what we're asking a hospital to do, it also needs to be a part of the workflow and the existing workflow that is there and is in place. Or there needs to be an alternative workflow that's developed that's just as easy and is still delivering extraordinary patient care. First and foremost, we are here to make sure that our patients are safe, they leave our facilities in a better condition than when they arrived, and that hopefully long term, they're not coming back to our facilities. So it depends on whether we're talking about a service or what that a vendor's going to be providing us and working with a recycler on how we would think about this, or whether it's a product that we're trying to increase access to for our patients. So I'll start with on the service side. When I think about, we'll stick with plastics, when I think about plastics recycling in a hospital space, there's a lot of complexities to think about. Obviously, it depends on the markets that are available downstream, who's going to actually take those materials, what's the quality of those materials that's required in order for it to be picked up from our facilities, and what mode is it leaving our docks. Being in downtown Boston, we have space for 2 compactors, really not much more. We don't have a baler. Our docks are quite busy. Plastics are a high volume, very light material. There's some complexities with that. I think there's some very creative solutions that we can figure out on how to make that piece financially viable. But then if you start to work upstream and think about, okay, where are these plastics being generated, in what space,
How are we going to collect them? Is there space for a collection bin that's convenient? In that place that's convenient, like a patient room, what are the risks associated with capturing it in a patient room? Is there a risk of contamination? What type of contamination? In healthcare, we define contamination much differently than our fellow recyclers. We talk about contamination like biohazardous materials. In a lot of ways, like pre-case in the operating room, that's the cleanest plastic you're gonna ever touch. But there's still this air of, oh my goodness, it was in a hospital, it's contaminated. Sarjo and I go to work on a daily basis, and we don't leave contaminated, hopefully. So there's, I think, a lot of opportunity for education of not only our staff, but also whoever we're partnering with downstream. So that's a large part of kind of the service vetting process to see if we can partner, we can think through what does it mean, what is your definition of contamination versus ours. So then, is there collection space available? Can we educate staff on what type of plastic we're trying to capture? If you start talking about all of the different types of plastics that enter a hospital and saying that they all need to go to a different outlet because the markets are different for all of those different plastics, or how many bins are we talking about? Currently, in a clinical space, our staff are interacting with 12 different waste streams in different collection bins. So just talking about adding, and most of those are required by regulation, and rightfully so. So then you start to talk about, okay, let's add just one bin, but then which plastic material are you gonna value? And is that really worth it to set up all the labor and logistics to move it downstream? And again, like, these are all the questions that I grapple with on a daily basis, and looking forward to working with Polycarbon on grappling with these topics. But ultimately, my long-term innovation on plastics recycling is there's a one-bin solution. I can hardly, I'm in the space, hardly tell the difference between all the different types of plastics. There is no way a nurse and physician is going to understand the different types of plastics and which bin it should be put in. Even if we had the space, right, and you had your 7 different bins, it's not going to happen, and that's not going to integrate into the work stream. So how do we think about, okay, great, from our end, it has to go into one bin, but then what does that look like downstream? Is there a middleman in between us and a recycler in order to get the appropriate plastics to them? What are those types of logistics? And then let's pull in the correct stakeholders to think through that. So lots of fun. So anytime you talk about a new program, obviously there's just a lot to think about. Never mind then the financial conversation of what is this going to cost us. But I have the fun of thinking through this and figuring out who are the correct stakeholders to pull in the room, what types of financial incentives from the state or just internally, or how do we think about getting healthcare to internalize the cost of, or the cost to society in the future of if we don't figure these things out. But yeah, so lots of vetting on the service side. A lot of times it'll flow through myself, we have a zero waste task force that grapples with all of these different priorities, and we'll do an initial vetting before it starts to go up into leadership. And usually, if it's not financially viable, it's probably not making it past our desk. Unless there is another very compelling case for another reason, and it truly won't impact operations, it can hopefully make it past us. And again, happy to innovate even further and pitch the case differently depending on the service. On the product side, a lot of this flows through our value analysis committee. Typically, there is a clinical partner, depending again on what type of product we want to be vetting and want to be bringing through that process. A lot of times, it's our department looking at life cycle assessments, understanding and scrutinizing, is this really applicable? Are the assumptions that were made in this LCA actually viable? Or does this product actually not make a difference? And it's not really necessarily worth it coming from sustainability, maybe worth coming from a clinician, because again, it may have better patient outcomes, but if it's ultimately the same, we offer that kind of additional lens of let's vet all of the marketing materials that are being provided from the vendors coming in. But ultimately, a lot of that work, and when we talk about products, I find a lot of strong clinical partners that are willing to first vet, like, is this safe for patient care, and will this change the patient outcomes for the better or for the worse? And if there is a positive patient care case, then okay, let's add that sustainability lens. Let's talk about the financials and kind of move forward from there. But yeah, it's a lot. I'm sure all of you may have some responses to that too, but happy to talk more about the operational logistics of hospitals.
How much time do we have?
Well, after this, we're going to be opening up for questions from the audience. So
Okay.
we have all this extra time now to
Perfect.
questions answered.
Awesome. Do you guys have a quick response to what Avery said? And
Yeah, I haven't been in a hospital in 5 years, so I am not as qualified as the folks on this couch to talk about this issue. But the one thing I sense is the frustration that we can't do it more faster. I very much relate to that, and I also want to point out that one of my favorite analogies is that sustainability is more of a vitamin than a vaccine. You don't get to just make the decision to do the right thing one time, and then it buys you sustainability immunity for the rest of your life. Instead, you need to build it into a process, and it needs to be something that you choose to do routinely and habitually. And what I hear about the struggles in the healthcare system reminds me that we are operating way too far down Maslow's hierarchy of needs for sustainability to be a prioritized decision, and we need to find ways to intervene upstream with extended producer responsibility, manufacturer driven sustainability, and then also just build in systems at low stakes positions in the healthcare system to make the right choice and make it easy to make that right choice. Because I think Hunter said it earlier, I don't know where he is, but we often let perfect be the enemy of the good. If we can make a meaningful difference on blue wrap, which you all are already doing, on flexible packaging, on just sterilizing and finding an offtake partnership for syringes, that's going to make a meaningful impact. But I hear the frustration in the healthcare sector, and it makes so much sense because you're right, the patient doesn't care whether or not the recycling is happening next to their bed or in the ICU. They don't, and neither is the nurse, neither is the physician. How do we build systems, durable, scalable systems around them that allow them to intervene earlier, or at least use commodities and products in that setting that are more sustainable to begin with? Because it's too difficult to ask folks like Sarju that are in a hospital setting to remember to make the sustainable choice when they've been trained their whole lives on something different.
Yeah, completely agree. I mean, when I'm in cath lab, right, I don't care, really, as you say. I cannot care when I'm dealing with few millimeters of coronary artery. Do I care about that plastic, or do I care about those 3 millimeters, right? And if you are a patient, you don't want me to care about plastic. You want me to care about that 3 millimeter, right? But at the same time, I think as kind of bringing the clinical analogy to this healthcare sustainability discussion, we never give our patients a menu of all the choices, right? We only give menu of the right choices. And they can choose among those choices, which are all correct. They have the power, but it's not just menu of everything. And I think that's where we need to your point, bring it very upstream, that we are only leaving right choices on the table. And I think part of it is, and part of our mission is to bring that data and visibility, right? Because many times the healthcare leaders and organizations, not that they are designed and engineered and wanting to do the wrong things, but they don't know. If you ask, maybe Avery is the only one in our entire 14 hospital system knows all the data, but if you ask any other leader, they cannot tell you how many waste streams we have, how much waste we generated, where did that end up, what's the percentage of recycling, what's the greenhouse gas, how many patients we harmed in causing, while treating so many, how many patients did we end up harming? I don't think any of our leaders, including myself, can answer that. And I think that's a communication gap, but I think it starts with the data and visibility, and then I think we need to communicate, not just in sense of greenhouse gas and big numbers, but in something people can relate to. And I think that's where probably there is a break in the, Avery, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I was going to say, I agree with all the things that you said are needed, but in the hospital space where roles like ours come into play is how do we shift the culture of a hospital? How do we start to have these conversations? There's a lot that we can't do. Yes, we should make it easier upstream for our supply chain to just have default all the sustainable products flowing to our facilities. that's an ideal world, right? But there's a lot in terms of healthcare is so wasteful, and our processes so many times don't make sense for patient care. And so there's a lot of opportunity to question why. Why, like, is this going to change the patient outcome if we use less of this material? Or, and so I think there's a lot of opportunity for there to be sustainability departments to have healthcare leadership to really think about how do you build a culture of change within a hospital. It starts with goals in the first place, which at least PIMC and LHMC have done, but allows you to track towards something, to really build transparency on what are we actually doing, even if the baseline in the beginning is painful to look at on how many tons of waste leave our facility on a daily basis, but at least gives you a starting point to have productive conversations, to say we can do better, and let's start to understand what's leaving our facilities so we can work upstream on where the highest priorities are. There's also a lot of different choices that physicians can make to deliver more sustainable care. There's a lot of work in anesthetic gases that there's choice anesthesiologists have to have a lower greenhouse gas impact on the cases that they're delivering. So there's a lot that hospitals can do in building that culture, building the governance structure on figuring out how to implement this, how to change policies, how to change practices. Again, keeping patient care at the heart of all of that. But there's a lot that I think healthcare can do to think differently and to drive education amongst all of ourselves on what we're actually talking about and how do we do differently, and not just write it off because we planted a tree and felt great about planting that tree to offset our paper. So I'll stop there.
I think that's a really good point, and also like it gets to Sarju's point, which is that we need to quantify, we need to measure so that we can know what the impact looks like. And so I think data is critical here. I work for a company that services a lot of biotech and biopharma. No one is dying on the operating table when they are like pipetting a 96-well plate. So the opportunity to intervene and say, oh, yeah, I forgot I can recycle this, let me put this in a different bin. It's a much lower stakes environment where we have a higher probability of success. But in this instance here, in the healthcare sector, I think they're going to be motivated by the same thing that scientists are motivated by, just data. Show me that what I'm doing is making an impact. Show me why I should care. Show me how much of a difference it makes. I think there's this fundamental drive that we all have to address climate change, to become better ecological stewards and whatnot. But it's a huge abstract issue. Breaking it down into data and individual actions that can be measured and quantified over time, that is the key to success. That's where we've had success as a company, is basically bringing that data back to scientists, showing them, you know, there's 12 billion pounds of this rigid plastic going into landfills and incinerators every single year, but you know how much you recycle? It's more than you think. It's 1,200 pounds per month. You're making that difference. What does that mean? What does that translate to in terms of CO2 emissions, fresh water conservation, fundamentally the most important metric, which is how much fossil fuels are you supplanting or displacing in the market? What products are you displacing in the market? What does that mean for the consumer? And most importantly, the planet. That data is critical, and we should all be kind of speaking the same language in that space. And I think this team here is doing an awesome job of creating a culture around that and building that data infrastructure so that physicians who are sitting there saying, you know what, like, a patient isn't about to die, and I did notice that this bin is full. If I go and replace it, it means less of this material will go into red bag waste. It's an excellent decision that multiplied millions of times over amounts to megatons of CO2 emissions reduction.
I just want to add something. So I was at a conference in Europe about a month ago, and there was a panel of investors right there, big funds, and the big question is clean tech dead? And I thought that was a big question. And so what they were basically saying is that, so their answer was it's not. First of all, let's just be clear, it's not dead. But what they were saying is this whole movement of doing things, you know, going into the clean tech space that cost more money to produce, that costs more money for the end user, that's dead. And I think what's going on right now is we have to make sustainable items the baseline. That's what we have to work on. We shouldn't have, I think that we have to encourage people, you know, innovators like you, even like me and others who are very fond of making this planet a better place for the future, creating innovations that are not necessarily great for the environment, because that's very important, but also can be that costly. Like, it has to be as affordable as the cheapest products that you guys use, because no one will pay for it. They just won't. And I don't think the answer lies in people having to make a decision, because in the spur of the moment, in an operating room, or a nurse who's dealing with 15 patients, an hour or whatever, they can't think about these things. What we have to give them are sustainable tools to work with, so that they don't have to think. They don't have to have an extra thing to think about. And so I think where we have to head, the direction we have to head, is encouraging and supporting innovations that are sustainable and that come in at a price point and that are as equal as what we're currently using now. And that is where we're going to really make change. That is where impact is going to happen. Because once these sustainable items, whether it's plastic or battery or whatever it is, becomes the baseline, then that is where we're going to see the true impact. Because we won't need to ask all these questions. And I'm not saying data doesn't matter. I think it does matter. But I think we have to now look at, what are we creating that would actually make impact, that will be used, and that people will pay for.
Agree. Data is a way to transition into, and clean tech should be dead, because the only tech should be left on the table should be the clean tech, right? We should be specifying that in future, to your point. One quick comment and then we'll open up. Thank you.
Very, very quick comment. So I know my previous comment was quite pessimistic, but I think I want to end on a very optimistic and realistic note. We win a race by the steps we take, right? Not all at once. And I just want to share a couple of steps industry is taking that is a lot to be thrilled about. So on the device maker side, before they even get to the healthcare system, there's people adopting ways to sterilize without ever sending it out, right? So they can come back and say, hey, listen, we are able, not only for us, able to control our supply chain, which is great for our business, but for our customers, here's how much carbon emissions we are able to reduce, right? Here's how the reduction of cancer-causing pollutants into our communities. And that for them is a business benefit. That for you is a benefit in terms of supplier sustainability. We have folks that are introducing new innovations into the healthcare systems, a lot of which are electronics-based. They're changing their business model to a per use rather than a single unit, so that incentivizes reuse. And they're willing to absorb the cost of reprocessing decontamination. So one, it doesn't tie up the SPDs, sterile processing departments, but it also enables hospitals to use these devices that have a lower footprint. And on the back end, leaving facilities and labs, companies are starting to see, hey, if we can give our customers a very cost-effective way to turn this from a biohazardous waste, pathogenic waste, to regular waste stream, that's cost-effective for us, that's a benefit for everyone. So those are things that are currently in development, and you think once that gets scaled up, it has a major impact to the goal that we're all working towards.
Thank you so much, and I would like to thank the organizing team and EPAM for hosting us. And there is a social cost to everything we do, right? But who is going to pay for that cost? And that's an open question. Anyone can answer, but we would.
So what I want to do now is bring up a few more chairs, and those from the first panel come up here. And so I really would like some audience participation here. I know if you're like me, I've had questions along the way, and I'm sure they'd be happy to answer.
One of the questions I have is, you were talking about the idea that we have to design sustainability into the products. What's the role of regulation in doing that as opposed to changing the culture of the companies that are designing things? It's easy to say, I want to design sustainability, but if the other guy doesn't and his is cheaper, I'm not necessarily going to have a business at the end of the day.
So are you asking what the FDA will say?
No,
Is that what you're saying?
Regulation in general, whether it's from the earlier people who were talking about the idea of, okay, you can't throw this away, or you can't introduce it, whether it's FDA, I don't know, there's a lot of ways to regulate.
So-
What's the role of regulation versus
in
the
medical
role of
devices,
changing
right.
culture?
So in medical devices, the FDA needs to make sure it works and it's effective. I don't think they really care if it's sustainable. So they just want to make sure it works, and they want to make sure it's not going to kill anyone and it's going to give you the right results. So unless the FDA decides, oh, we're not going to consider this, or we're just going to do extra bonus points for it to be sustainable, again, I don't think they care. And I think that's the thing, is the system does not see sustainability as a must. I think today it's a bonus, right? And unless you fall into look, any innovation needs to, in order for it to have a chance at making it, it needs to be better, cheaper, faster, right? So you can do better, right? A lot of the sustainable items can be better. It can be faster, but if it's not cheaper, regulators are not going to look at it. Like, they don't care. And so for you to have a business and to integrate sustainability in your solution, it really does need to be as cheap, if not cheaper. And I think that's the biggest problem, is that the systems to make things sustainable are more expensive, right? To make plastic from corn or whatever, that is still an expensive process. So the regulators, I don't think, are going to care at all. I mean, I have to say it like it is. But if you take the time for you to integrate sustainability in any possible way and still make it as cheap or cheaper, I think that's where your in is. I mean, that's the reality of things. I think that's the reality of the things that I see. I think in the hospitals, they're seeing the same thing, right? I mean, things can't cost more unless there's a significant case study to make the cost, right, to make it okay. So in the business of making things sustainable, you have to look at cost. And if you don't look at cost, I think that's where the issue lies.
I was just to piggyback off of her, there's actually very tangible things that are currently being done as an FDA industry collaboration in this aspect. So there was a guidance document, I think the comment period closed in Q4 of last year, which essentially enables a device maker to change materials, to make an argument for changing materials on their devices on a material testing basis, rather than testing the whole device, right? You imagine if you're moving your catheter from a regular plastic to a recycled stream, currently you would necessarily have to revalidate the whole system. That is extremely expensive, and then for PMA devices, you can't even do accelerated aging, which speeds up the age testing, so you're decreasing the amount of lifespan of your product, right? But that is currently in development, that if you can make the material is the same, there's no impact or change in the material. It's designed to make it easier for manufacturers to make these swaps in either processes or device materials. So I do think FDA plays a large role, and the interactions through AVAMed as well has been extremely useful. There's a sustainability working group, and they've been very productive in their conversations with FDA on these matters as well. So.
One thing I'll add is maybe it may not be regulated at the state or definitely not the federal level, but you can buy into the world of certifications. So if there's a peer-wide accepted certification for a particular device or material or class of materials, you can then create a organizational policy to mandate that those materials you buy are certified. You just need to make sure that certification is vetted and agreed among your peers that it is a useful certification. So whether that's something as simple as FSC paper, or whether for a medical device, maybe there are other types of certifications, other folks might know those better, but I'd say internal policies to an entity, whether that's a hospital or a university, are still useful tools even if the state isn't regulating it.
Hi, this is for regulation people. Do you know if there are any plans to develop a regulation similar as the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive from the EU that applies for the healthcare industry to disclose their ESG performance? I mean, this law is fairly new. It was just like adopted in 2022, so like maybe we don't really have a lot of metrics to prove if it's a good law or not. And my second question is, do you know if there is any healthcare facility that has sustainability information disclosed in a clear way for users to access it? And is there any regulation about it?
I can start. So Mass Health, as of this year, is requiring all acute hospitals across the state of Massachusetts for the first time to at least share data with them. I don't know if they're already sharing this publicly or not. It'll be scope 1 and 2 emissions only though. So nothing compared to the standards that are out in the EU, but this is the first time that we are going to have to be publicly or at least sharing our data beyond our four walls. What they're going to do with that, time will tell. I think they're building the pathway as we discussed. Sarju and I were part of those conversations of what that can look like. I think the part that I struggle with and where I am cautious with requiring this type of reporting is the amount of time and effort that's going into the reporting when there's a lot of clear actions that we can take today to at least bring all of our hospitals up to a common level. And there's not a lot, healthcare sustainability professionals are growing and expanding across the country, but I'm cautious on how much of our time would be spent on reporting versus actually taking action and getting our systems to move forward. This is where Sarju is building a phenomenal system to help make this easier for us to be able to do and to make reporting easier and more streamlined. But that's the first place. I do know there are hospitals out there across the nation that do have their data on their websites and are at least publicly sharing it. Most hospitals are following the greenhouse gas protocol or some other reporting framework, but some are getting third-party validators to look at their data. I'd say most are not, unless required through reporting standards like Mass Health. But how much, it hurts me from my budget is very small, and how much we have to spend now on third-party verification to just continue to do the work. I do think there's ways we can think more creatively about how do we still achieve the outcome of reducing the environmental impact of healthcare while using regulations to help support this work, but I think there's some word of caution that healthcare is used to being regulated and we're used to just checking the box, is what I'll say. And I want us to continue to think creatively and think and be an innovation hub where telling us to report, we're just going to report. And I get nervous about that.
Did you have a question earlier?
If I could, I would just get back to the previous question and the conversation about in the medical device field. Clearly, there's, what I'm hearing is that there's a need for cost parity, sustainability versus non-sustainability. Let's put it that way. I will say that there's kind of a different economic at work when it comes to things like services. So, like I talked about green labs, recycling, polycarbon. We do the same thing generally in terms of picking up the plastic that can be recaptured and recycled into something new. And that a lot of people are willing to pay for that service. And it is not cost parity in terms of picking up a ton of plastic, from a lab versus throwing it in the trash, okay? It's definitely more of a cost to the laboratory to recycle and do the right thing. And yet there is so much, I always say that, nobody understands that we are on one big enclosed ecosystem on this planet like a life scientist, okay? And therefore there is a great push socially in these laboratories to do the right thing and be willing to pay for it if they can find a way to do that. So certainly there's people who want to do it and their laboratory can't afford it, but there was one recycling group for this, and now there are two, and this is now an industry, right? So it can be done, and I'm just saying that there are enough people out there supporting this movement that it can happen.
I'm really glad you swung at that pitch. I was debating whether or not I was going to answer as well. It's a very different experience coming from the industry direction that I have, where we get back to that concept of value proposition. The customer does care fundamentally about the impact they're having. I think it might have a little bit to do with about the psychology of a physician versus a scientist, where if you've worked in a lab, 95% of your work is going to fail, and that's just part of it. And so you think in terms of what are the consequences of failure, what are the byproducts of failure, what happens to failure. You care a lot more about that. In Sarju's world, 5% failure is not acceptable. It has to be perfection, and at any cost necessary. And I think that those two different kind of consumer psychologies probably influence the success of what Gretchen is talking about, which is bringing a service that is fundamentally more expensive than burying plastic in the ground, but seeing adoption in that space be more successful, I think kind of just gets back to the difference in the psychology of the consumer. And so I definitely don't want to overfit any rule here. Like the way polycarbonate works, the way green labs recycling works, the ways recyclers work when they service biotech and biopharma may not work in a hospital. That just may be the case. But it also doesn't mean that we should give up. It just means that, one size doesn't fit all. There's going to be different approaches here, and there's going to be higher amounts of pressure coming from these two in terms of making sure that sustainability is a differentiator, but can't be a cost addition. I very, very much empathize with that. That's a difficult position to be in, and it's amazing what they've accomplished to be more sustainable and also deliver on cost. But not every industry is like that, and not everyone buys something thinking, is it the cheapest thing? People buy things thinking, does this align with my personal values? Companies buy things saying, does this align with my corporate values? And fortunately, in the space that me and Gretchen work in, there's a ton of companies out there that have very strong sustainability initiatives core to the values of those corporations, and that's why we're seeing a lot of success in that space.
I just want to add to that. So what I'm building and where I stand, I'm more on the consumer side. And what I want to say is, well, let me just give you an example. Who here have ever used a pregnancy test? Well, most pregnancy tests have a battery. Did you ever think about breaking the pregnancy test open and keeping the battery? Right? Probably not. And that's because you just go and you just buy a pregnancy test and you don't think about what you're going to do with it. Now, a company tried to do a fully biodegradable pregnancy test and couldn't get funding. Why? Because that pregnancy test could not, it couldn't compete with the prices of of all the other pregnancy tests on the market. So as consumers, and I'm not talking about the healthcare system, as consumers, we're going to go to the pharmacy or the store, whatever it is, and we're going to look at, okay, so what do I need now, right? And then if I put on there, sustainable battery, if I put on there sustainable plastic on the box, will they really care? I actually don't know. I can't really tell you yes or no, but what I can tell you is if my cost, the price of my solution is twice more expensive than the one that is not sustainable, I can guarantee you very few people will buy it. The difference between the two will be significant. And so the way that I'm approaching this for this solution is to integrate a sustainability aspect to it so that it won't matter. It just won't matter. People won't think about it. If they need it, they just get it. Now, there's a big difference between how I'm approaching this at the consumer level versus how corporation and healthcare systems should be approaching it. And I think that what you guys are doing is amazing because that has huge impact. Every step you take has impact, and you're right, it doesn't always come down to cost. Cost is a big thing, but it doesn't have to, because you're looking at you're looking at the forest versus the tree. I am looking at it as at a very granular level, which is what will the consumer choose when they're in front or in that store. And that, I think, anybody who is looking at these kind of consumer-driven innovation need to integrate sustainability in it so that the question doesn't even arise. And that's where I'm coming from.
I think that's maybe where we should close today. We're a little bit over time, and I know there are some people who would like to take a tour. So let's thank all of our